The floor beneath my knees was made of something that looked like black glass, and it was so cold that I could feel it through the fabric of my uniform. Guards stood on both sides of me, each one taller than any human I had ever met, their eyes glowing faintly with a dull red light. My hands were bound behind my back with a cord that pulsed slightly, like it was alive. My name is Daniel Cross, and 3 hours earlier I had been the most unimportant person on my ship. Now I was the only human standing inside the throne room of the Nixari Empire, waiting to learn if I would be executed before sunset, if this place even had a sunset. It had started as a simple diplomatic mission. My ship, the Meridian Hope, carried a small team of humans sent to open trade talks with the Nixari Dominion, an ancient power that controlled a third of known space. We were new to the stars, barely a century into real interstellar travel, and the Nixari were old beyond anything we could measure. Our captain, Owen Hale, had warned us to be careful, to touch nothing, to speak only when spoken to. But our ship's navigation system, without any warning, had clipped the edge of an ancient defense field surrounding the Nixari home system. Alarms had screamed through every corridor. Within minutes, warships larger than mountains surrounded us, and men in dark armor pulled me from the ship, saying only that I would answer for the intrusion personally. Now I knelt in front of a throne, carved from a single piece of black stone, empty for the moment, waiting for whoever would decide my fate. The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of the guard's armor, and my own heartbeat, which felt far too loud. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened, and every guard in the room dropped to one knee at once. I did not need anyone to tell me who was walking toward me. I could feel it in the air, a kind of pressure, like the room itself was bowing. She was not what I expected. I had imagined something monstrous, something with claws and fangs bared for effect, a creature built to frighten. Instead, a woman walked toward the throne with unhurried steps, wearing a simple dark robe without decoration, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her skin was pale, but not sickly, more like moonlight had been poured into it. Her eyes were a deep violet, and when they landed on me, I felt like every secret I had ever kept was suddenly visible. She sat on the throne without a word, and the guards around me straightened but did not rise. For a long moment, she simply looked at me, and I did not dare look away, though every instinct told me to lower my eyes. "Leave us," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the entire hall. The guards hesitated only a second before filing out, along with the officials who had gathered to watch my judgment. Within a minute, the massive room was empty except for the two of us, and the sound of the doors closing behind the last guard echoed like a final verdict. I did not understand. I did not understand. Prisoners were not left alone with rulers. Threats were not given privacy. I searched her face for some sign of what was coming, an order for a private execution, a personal punishment. Instead, she rose from the throne and walked down the steps toward me, slow and deliberate, until she stood only a few feet away. She knelt, which surprised me more than anything else that had happened that day. An empress, kneeling in front of a bound prisoner. She reached out and gently lifted my chin with 2 fingers, forcing me to meet her eyes directly. Her touch was cold, but not unpleasant, like touching stone that had been sitting in shade. "You are afraid," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I answered, because lying seemed pointless and somehow dangerous in a way I could not explain. She studied my face, the way someone studies an old photograph, searching for details that time had worn away. Her violet eyes moved slowly across my features, and for a moment I saw something flicker there that did not belong on the face of a monster. It looked almost like grief. "What is your name?" she asked. "Daniel Cross," I said. "I am part of the diplomatic mission from Earth. The intrusion into your system was an accident. Our navigation system malfunctioned. It was never our intention to." "I did not ask why you are here," she said, cutting me off gently. "I asked your name because I wanted to hear a human say it again. That confused me more than anything. Again. As if she had heard humans speak before, as if this was not her first encounter with my species. I had been told, during our brief training before the mission, that the Nexari rarely allowed contact with new species until decades of observation had passed. We were supposed to be one of the first true meetings between our people and hers. "I don't understand," I said carefully. "Have you met humans before?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she reached forward and undid the cord binding my wrists with a single motion, as if it were made of paper instead of restraint metal. I flexed my fingers, unsure whether this meant I was free or whether it was simply easier for her to kill me without restraints in the way. "Stand up, Daniel Cross," she said. I stood, my legs stiff from kneeling so long. Up close, she was not much taller than me, though something about her presence made her seem to fill the entire room. She circled me slowly, studying me from every angle, and I forced myself to stay still, though every muscle wanted to run. "Your kind arrived faster than we expected," she said, more to herself than to me. "Faster than any species I have watched in a very long time. You have barely learned to walk among the stars, and already you push into places that could destroy you without a second thought." "We didn't mean to trespass," I said. "If you let us leave, we can make sure it never happens again." She stopped in front of me again, and this time there was something almost like amusement in her expression, though it did not quite reach a smile. "You still think this is about the border you crossed," she said. "It is not." "Then what is this about?" She stepped closer, close enough that I could see there was no reflection of the torchlight in her eyes, only that same deep violet color, endless and unreadable. When she spoke again, her voice dropped lower, almost gentle, almost sad. "I have ruled this empire for longer than your species has existed as it does now," she said. "I have met 1,000 ambassadors from 1,000 different worlds. Most of them tremble the way you tremble, but for different reasons. They fear me because I am powerful. They fear the empire because it is old and cannot be reasoned with easily." "And me?" I asked, though part of me did not want to know the answer. She reached out and placed her palm gently against the side of my face, and though her touch was cold, it did not feel threatening. It felt strangely like recognition. "You fear me the way someone fears a memory they cannot quite place," she said, "and I feel the same when I look at you." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The hall around us seemed to grow quieter, if that was even possible, the air itself holding still to listen. "There is something in your eyes," she continued, "something stubborn, something that refuses to bow even when every part of you is screaming to submit. I have seen that look only once before, a very long time ago, in eyes that were not so different from yours." "Whose eyes?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting somewhere far beyond the walls of the throne room, somewhere I could not follow. When she finally spoke, the words landed with a weight I did not expect. "Mine," she said. I blinked, certain I had misheard her. "I don't understand." She lowered her hand from my face and turned away, walking slowly back toward the throne, though she did not sit. Instead, she stood beside it, one hand resting on the black stone, her back to me, for the first time since she had entered the room. "There are things about this empire that even my own people do not know," she said. "Things I have kept buried for longer than most civilizations survive. But you have reminded me of something I thought I had forgotten, Daniel Cross, and I find that I do not wish to forget it again." She turned back to face me, and in that moment, something in her expression shifted, the distance between Empress and prisoner narrowing into something else entirely, something I did not have a name for yet. "You will not be executed," she said. "You will not be sent back to your ship either, not yet. I want you to remain here, in the palace, under my protection." "Protection from what?" I asked, and even as the words left my mouth, I realized I already suspected the truth would not comfort me. She looked at me for a long moment, and when she finally answered, her voice was quiet enough that I had to lean forward slightly to catch every word. "From everyone in this empire who will want you dead, the moment they learn what I am about to tell you," she said, "and from the truth of what I once was, before I became what you see standing in front of you now. The doors at the end of the hall opened again, but this time it was not guards who entered. A woman in dark formal robes strode in quickly, her expression tight with concern, and I recognized her instantly. Grace Whitfield, one of the human diplomats from my own ship, had somehow been allowed into the palace. Behind her walked a tall Nixari official, whose eyes fixed on me with open suspicion the moment he entered. "Your Majesty," the official said, bowing stiffly, though his eyes never left me. "Word has already spread among the noble houses that you dismissed your entire court to speak with the human prisoner alone. Lord Cassian Thorne has requested an audience, immediately." The Empress's expression did not change, but I noticed something tighten around her eyes, a flicker of tension quickly hidden away. "Tell Lord Thorne I will see him when I am ready," she said, "not before." The official hesitated, clearly unhappy with that answer, but he bowed again and left without further argument. Grace stepped closer to me, relief washing over her face when she saw I was unharmed, though her eyes were full of questions she clearly did not know how to ask in front of the Empress. "Daniel, are you all right?" she asked. "I think so," I said, though I was not entirely certain that was true. The Empress watched the exchange between us with quiet interest, and then she spoke again, addressing both of us now, though her eyes lingered on me a moment longer than they needed to. "Your companion may stay in the palace as well," she said. "But know this, both of you. What is beginning here today will not end quietly. There are those within my own empire who have waited centuries for an excuse to challenge everything I have built, and your presence here has just given them one." "Then why help us at all?" I asked. "Why not simply send us away and avoid the trouble?" She stepped down from the throne one final time, standing close enough that I could see the flicker of something ancient and unbearably tired behind her eyes, something that had been carrying a weight for far longer than I could imagine. "Because I have spent centuries watching my empire forget what it means to be alive," she said. "And because looking into your eyes, Daniel Cross, is the closest I have come in a very long time to remembering who I used to be." She turned and walked toward a side door, pausing only once to look back at me over her shoulder. "Rest tonight," she said. "Tomorrow I will tell you everything, and you will understand exactly why I said what I said the moment I saw you kneeling on this floor." The door closed behind her, leaving Grace and me standing alone in the vast, silent hall, both of us struggling to understand how everything had changed so quickly, and both of us aware, without needing to say it aloud, that we had just stepped into something far larger than a simple diplomatic accident. Neither of us knew yet how deep it would go, or how many lives, human and Nixari alike, would depend on what happened next. The Empress had called me human, as if the word itself meant something important to her, something personal. I did not yet know that by morning I would learn she had once been human herself, and that the fate of an entire empire had already begun to turn on the choice she had made the moment she looked into my eyes and decided not to let me die. Somewhere in the palace, Lord Cassian Thorne was already gathering allies, already preparing to challenge an empress who had ruled unquestioned for longer than recorded history. And somewhere far beyond the palace walls, in the coldest, oldest parts of Nexari space, something else was stirring, something the Empress had kept hidden for centuries, something that would soon make my survival the least important question of all. For now, I only knew one thing for certain. I was the first human to ever be told, by the ruler of an empire older than my entire species, that she knew me, and I had no idea yet just how true those words really were. Morning did not exist in the Nixari palace the way it existed on Earth. There was no sun to mark the change of hours, only soft artificial light that slowly brightened along the corridors, like the palace itself was waking up. I had barely slept, lying awake in a guest chamber larger than my entire apartment back home, replaying every word the Empress had said to me. Grace Whitfield sat across from me at a small table near the window, both of us picking at food neither of us had the appetite to eat. "You believe her," Grace said quietly. It was not really a question. I don't know what to believe, I admitted. But I know what I saw in her eyes. That wasn't the look of someone playing games. Before Grace could respond, the door to our chamber opened without a knock, and a young Nixari attendant stepped inside, her expression polite but firm. "The Empress requests your presence, Daniel Cross," she said. "Alone." Grace shot me a worried glance, but I nodded to reassure her, though I felt anything but reassured myself. I followed the attendant through corridors lined with tall windows that looked out onto a city unlike anything I had ever seen. Towers of dark stone, twisted into shapes that seemed to defy simple architecture, lit by threads of soft blue light that ran along every structure like veins. The attendant led me to a private chamber, smaller than the throne room, filled with shelves of old books and strange devices I did not recognize. The Empress stood near a tall window, her back to me, staring out at the city below. "Did you sleep?" she asked without turning around. "Not much," I admitted. She turned to face me, and in the softer light of this room, she looked different than she had in the throne room, less like a ruler and more like a person carrying an old, familiar tiredness. "I promised you answers," she said. "Sit, please." I lowered myself into a chair near the window, and she sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. For a long moment, she said nothing, as if gathering the courage to speak words she had not spoken aloud in a very long time. "My name was not always what it is now," she began. "Long before I became what you see in front of you, I was born on a colony ship called the Aldervane, one of the first vessels to leave Earth in search of a new home among the stars. My birth name was Eleanor Vance." I stared at her, trying to reconcile the ancient, powerful being in front of me with the idea that she had once been an ordinary human woman with an ordinary human name. "That's not possible," I said. "Human colonization records don't go back that far. We only reached deep space a century ago." "Because your recorded history begins after the Aldervane disappeared," she said. "It vanished from Earth's records because it was never meant to return, and Earth eventually forgot it had ever launched at all. We traveled further than anyone expected, deeper into unmapped space, until something found us that no map could have prepared us for." "What found you?" I asked. Her eyes grew distant, as if she were looking through the walls of the room and back across centuries of memory. "An ancient power," she said. "Something that predates every empire currently existing among the stars, something that had learned how to preserve life far beyond its natural limits. It offered my people a choice: accept transformation and live forever as something new, or continue on our journey and likely perish in the void, as most colony ships eventually did. My people chose transformation. I chose it too, though I did not fully understand what I was agreeing to. And that transformation created the Nixari," I said slowly, pieces beginning to fit together in my mind. "Yes," she said, "we became the first generation of what my empire now calls the Nixari bloodline. We were given strength beyond anything human bodies were capable of, minds that could hold centuries of memory without fading, bodies that healed from wounds that would have killed us instantly before. But we were also changed in other ways, ways that were not always improvements." "What do you mean?" I asked. She rose from her chair and walked slowly toward a shelf lined with old objects, each one clearly ancient, clearly treasured. She picked up a small metal object shaped like a key, turning it over in her fingers as she spoke. "Over the centuries, as my empire grew, as new generations of Nixari were created and refined, something began to fade from us," she said. "The transformation process was perfected again and again, made more stable, more controlled, more predictable. But with every improvement, something else was quietly bred out of us. Something my people once had in abundance, back when we were still simply human." "What was it?" I asked. She turned to look at me, and there was something raw in her expression now, something that had clearly been buried for a very long time. "Defiance," she said. "Stubbornness. The refusal to simply accept things as they are, even when accepting would be easier, even when defiance serves no immediate purpose. My people were once willing to fight against impossible odds, simply because giving up felt worse than losing. Over time, as my empire grew more ordered, more controlled, more perfect in its own eyes, that quality became inconvenient. Rulers do not want subjects who question everything. So slowly, deliberately, later generations of Nixari were shaped to be more obedient, more accepting, more calm. "You mean they were engineered to be less rebellious?" I said. "Exactly," she said, "and I allowed it to happen, for a very long time, because it made my empire easier to govern, easier to control, easier to protect from itself. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself that a calm empire was a stable empire, but somewhere along the way, I began to feel as though I was ruling over a beautiful, quiet grave instead of a living civilization." I sat in silence for a moment, absorbing everything she had told me. Outside the window, the strange city continued its quiet, glowing existence, indifferent to the conversation happening within the palace walls. "So when you looked at me," I said slowly, "when you said you knew me, I saw the very thing my empire has spent centuries erasing from itself," she said. "I saw stubbornness in your eyes, even while you knelt in fear on that floor. I saw someone who was afraid, but who had not yet decided to give in to that fear. It has been a very long time since I have seen that look on anyone, human or Nixari." Before I could respond, the door to the chamber opened sharply, and the same official from the day before entered without waiting for permission, his expression tight with barely restrained urgency. "Your Majesty," he said, "Lord Cassian Thorn has gathered several of the noble houses. They are requesting an immediate audience regarding the human prisoner's continued presence in the palace." The Empress's expression hardened slightly, though she remained composed. "I will see them," she said. "Bring Daniel Cross as well. It is time the court understood exactly why he remains here." We were led through a series of grand hallways toward a large meeting chamber, far less ceremonial than the throne room but no less intimidating. A long table stretched across the room, surrounded by Nixari nobles dressed in dark, elaborate robes, each one watching me with open suspicion as I entered beside the Empress. At the head of the opposing side of the table stood a tall man with sharp features and pale gray eyes, his posture radiating quiet authority. I did not need an introduction to know this was Lord Cassian Thorn. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing slightly, though his tone carried no real respect. "The court is troubled by your decision to keep a human prisoner within the palace, especially one connected to an intrusion into our home system's defenses. The intrusion was an accident," the Empress said calmly, "one I have already resolved through proper diplomatic channels." "With respect," Lord Thorn said, "diplomatic accidents do not usually result in a prisoner being granted private audiences with the Empress herself, nor being housed within the palace as an honored guest rather than a captive." The room grew tense, several nobles exchanging quiet glances, clearly aware that something unusual was happening, even if they did not yet understand what. "My decisions regarding this human do not require your approval, Lord Thorn," the Empress said, her voice cool but firm. "Perhaps not," he replied smoothly, "but the safety of this empire does require the court's attention, especially when an untested species from a barely developed region of space is granted access to matters they cannot possibly understand." I felt every eye in the room shift toward me, and I forced myself to stand straight, refusing to shrink under the weight of their collective suspicion. The Empress glanced at me briefly, and something in her expression told me she was pleased that I had not looked away. "This meeting is concluded," she said, turning back to the assembled nobles. "I will address any further concerns when I deem it necessary." Lord Thorn bowed again, but as he straightened, his gray eyes locked onto mine for a brief, cold moment, and I understood without needing words that he had just decided I was a problem worth removing, one way or another. As we left the chamber, the Empress walked close beside me, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You have made an enemy today, Daniel Cross," she said. "Lord Thorn does not forgive easily, and he does not forget quickly either." "What does he want?" I asked. Control, she said simply. He believes the empire has grown weak under my rule, too slow to expand, too cautious in dealing with new species like yours. He sees your presence here as proof that I am no longer fit to guide this empire's future. And is he wrong? I asked, immediately regretting the boldness of the question. She stopped walking and turned to face me fully, and for a moment I thought I had overstepped badly enough to end whatever fragile trust had begun forming between us. Instead, something like approval flickered across her face. That, she said, is exactly the kind of question the Nixari of old would have asked without hesitation. It is a question I have not been asked by anyone in this empire for a very long time. We continued walking in silence after that, but I could feel something shifting between us, some understanding beginning to form that went far beyond politics or survival. She had lost something over the centuries, some vital piece of herself buried under generations of careful, controlled rule. And somehow, impossibly, my presence had begun to remind her of what that lost piece felt like. I did not yet know how dangerous that realization would become, both for me and for her. Lord Thorn was already moving pieces into place behind the scenes, and somewhere far beyond the palace, in places even the Empress had not fully explored in centuries, something ancient and forbidden was beginning to stir, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. For now, I only knew one thing clearly. The Empress of the Nixari Dominion, a being who had ruled for longer than my species had walked among the stars, had just told me that I reminded her of who she used to be. And in an empire built on centuries of careful control, that single truth was more dangerous than any weapon. The attack came 3 nights later, while I was walking alone through the palace gardens, a space the Empress had insisted I be allowed to visit whenever I needed air that did not feel thick with politics. The gardens were strange and beautiful, filled with plants that glowed faintly in the dark, their colors shifting slowly like breathing things. I had grown to enjoy the quiet there, a rare moment where I did not feel like every word I spoke was being measured by unseen judges. I did not hear the first attacker approach. I only felt the sudden pressure of a blade pressed against my throat from behind, and a voice, low and controlled, speaking directly into my ear. "You should have stayed on your ship, human." I froze, every instinct screaming at me to fight, though I knew a single wrong movement could end things instantly. A second figure stepped out from behind a tall, glowing plant, dressed in dark robes similar to the ones I had seen on the nobles in the meeting chamber. Neither of them wore Lord Thorn's personal colors, but I did not doubt for a moment who had sent them. "The Empress has made a mistake trusting you," the second attacker said. "We are simply here to correct it, before it costs the Empire more than it already has." I forced myself to remain still, my mind racing for any option that did not end with a blade across my throat. Then, without warning, a shape moved through the shadows behind the 2 attackers, fast enough that I barely registered it before the first attacker suddenly released his grip on me and staggered backward, dropping his blade with a strangled sound of surprise. I turned quickly, my hand instinctively going to my throat, and saw a woman standing between me and my attackers, dressed in the dark armor of the Nixari military, her eyes glowing faintly with the same red light I had seen in the throne room guards, though hers seemed sharper, more controlled. "General Mira Sable," the second attacker said, his voice tight with sudden caution. "This matter does not concern the military. Attempted harm against a guest under the Empress's personal protection concerns me a great deal," Mira said calmly, though her stance radiated readiness for violence. The 2 attackers exchanged a brief glance before retreating quickly into the shadows of the garden, clearly unwilling to risk a direct confrontation with someone of Mira's evident skill. Within moments, they had vanished entirely, leaving only silence and the faint glow of the garden's strange plants. "Are you injured?" Mira asked, turning to face me fully. "No," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "Thank you. If you hadn't arrived." "The Empress asked me to keep a discreet watch over you," she said, cutting off my gratitude with the same directness I was slowly learning to expect from the Nixari. It seems her caution was justified. She escorted me back toward the palace, her posture alert the entire way, scanning every shadow we passed, as though expecting a second attempt at any moment. When we reached the private wing where I was staying, she paused before leaving, studying me with an expression I could not quite read. "You should know," she said quietly, "not everyone who wishes you harm serves Lord Thorn directly. There are many within this court who believe humans do not belong within Nixari space at all, regardless of who protects you." "Then why help me?" I asked. "Because the Empress believes you matter," Mira said simply. "And in all my centuries of service, I have never known her instincts about such things to be wrong." She left without further explanation, and I sat alone in my chamber for a long time afterward, replaying the attack in my mind, trying to understand exactly how deep the danger around me truly ran. It was not long before Grace found me, her expression shifting quickly from relief to concern once she saw the faint mark left on my throat from the blade. "Daniel, what happened?" she asked urgently. I explained everything as calmly as I could, though my hand still trembled slightly as I spoke. Grace listened with growing alarm, and once I finished, she sat beside me, her expression troubled. "This is getting more dangerous than either of us expected," she said. "Maybe we should ask the Empress to send us home." "I don't think that's an option anymore," I said quietly, "not after everything she's told me." Before Grace could respond, the door to my chamber opened once more, and this time it was the Empress herself who entered, her expression darker than I had seen it before. She crossed the room quickly and examined the mark on my throat with a careful, focused intensity that reminded me she had lived through countless centuries of violence and knew exactly how close I had come to serious harm. "This should not have happened," she said, her voice low with barely restrained anger. "I will ensure it does not happen again." "Lord Thorn sent them," I said. "Didn't he?" "I have no proof yet," she said, "but I have little doubt." She sat beside me, and for a long moment, the three of us remained silent, the weight of the situation settling heavily over the room. Finally, the Empress spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost weary. "I did not expect the court to move against you so quickly," she said. "It seems my enemies are more emboldened than I realized. Why does my presence threaten them so much?" I asked. "I'm nobody, a minor diplomatic attaché. I have no power here." "You are not powerful in the way Lord Thorn fears," she said, "but you represent something far more dangerous to those who wish to maintain control over this empire. You represent change, a reminder that the Nixari were not always what they are now, and that perhaps they do not need to remain this way forever." Grace glanced between us, clearly beginning to understand the deeper layers of the situation that had been forming since my first night in the palace. "You're planning something," she said to the Empress, "something bigger than just protecting Daniel." The Empress did not deny it. Instead, she rose and walked toward the window, staring out at the glowing city below, her expression distant and thoughtful. "For centuries, I have watched my empire calcify into something rigid and controlled," she said. "I have allowed it, believing stability was worth the cost. But encountering your kind again, after so long, has reminded me of a truth I had buried deeply. An empire that fears change is an empire already dying, no matter how strong it appears." "So what happens now?" I asked. She turned back to face us, and there was a new resolve in her expression, something that had not been there when I first knelt before her throne. "Now," she said, "I intend to reveal certain truths to the court that I have kept hidden for a very long time, truths about the origins of the Nixari, about what we have lost over the centuries, and about certain dangers within my own empire that I have allowed to remain unspoken for far too long." "Dangers like Lord Thorn?" Grace asked. "Lord Thorn is merely a symptom," the Empress said. "The true danger runs far deeper, hidden among the oldest members of my court, individuals who have grown far too comfortable with practices I should have ended centuries ago." Her words carried a weight that made the room feel colder, and I found myself leaning forward, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything that had happened so far. "What kind of practices?" I asked carefully. She hesitated, glancing briefly toward the door as if to ensure we remained truly alone, before answering in a voice barely above a whisper. "There are those among the oldest Nixari elders," she said, "who have never accepted the limits of our transformation. They believe there exists a way to ascend beyond even what our first transformation granted us, a way to achieve power beyond anything currently possessed by our empire." "Ascend how?" I asked, though something in her tone told me I did not truly want to know the answer. "Through methods I have forbidden for centuries," she said, "methods that require far more than willing sacrifice. I had believed those practices ended long ago, suppressed and forgotten. Recently, however, I have received reports suggesting otherwise, reports I have not yet had the strength to fully investigate." The room fell silent again, the true scale of the situation beginning to settle over all three of us. This was no longer simply about political rivalry or noble ambition. Something far older and more dangerous was stirring within the empire, something the Empress herself had avoided confronting for far too long. "Why tell us this now?" Grace asked. The Empress looked at me directly, her violet eyes holding mine with quiet intensity. "Because I believe the time has come to finally confront what I have avoided for centuries," she said. "And because I no longer wish to face it alone." I felt the weight of her words settle over me, understanding slowly that whatever came next would require far more from me than simply surviving palace politics. Somewhere within the ancient reaches of Nexari space, something forbidden and dangerous was waiting, something that threatened not just the Empress, not just her empire, but potentially every human colony within reach of Nexari influence. Grace reached over and gripped my hand tightly, and I could see in her eyes the same realization forming that had already taken hold in mine. Whatever fragile safety we believed we had found within the palace walls was rapidly disappearing, replaced by something far larger and far more dangerous than either of us had anticipated when we first set out on what was supposed to be a simple diplomatic mission. The Empress rose from her seat, her expression hardening with quiet determination. "Rest while you can," she said. "Tomorrow, I intend to uncover exactly how deep this danger runs, and I fear that once we begin, there will be no turning back for any of us." She left the room without further explanation, leaving Grace and I alone with the growing certainty that the true danger facing the Nixari Empire, and possibly all of humanity within its reach, had only just begun to reveal itself. The journey to the outer reaches of Nixari space took 3 days aboard the Empress's personal vessel, a ship unlike anything I had seen before, sleek and silent, moving through the void without the usual hum of engines I had grown used to on human ships. General Mira Sable commanded a small team of loyal soldiers who accompanied us, while Grace remained close beside me throughout the journey, both of us still adjusting to the idea that we were now directly involved in uncovering a conspiracy that had remained hidden within the Nixari Empire for centuries. The Empress spent much of the journey in quiet contemplation, studying old records and reports that Mira had gathered discreetly over the past several months, evidence of unusual activity near a distant outpost known as Verath Hollow, a place officially listed as abandoned decades earlier. "According to these reports," Mira said, standing beside a display showing scans of the outpost, "there have been unauthorized supply shipments to Verath Hollow for at least the past 2 years, small at first, then increasing steadily." "Supplies for what purpose?" I asked. "That is what we intend to discover," the Empress said, her expression grim. As we drew closer to Verath Hollow, the ship's sensors detected faint energy signatures emanating from deep beneath the outpost's surface, patterns unlike anything in the Nixari's official records. The Empress studied the readings carefully, her expression growing more troubled with each passing moment. "These patterns," she said quietly, "they resemble something I have not seen in centuries, something I hoped had been destroyed long ago." "What is it?" Grace asked. "An old ritual chamber," the Empress said, "used long ago by the earliest Nixari elders, before such practices were forbidden. I ordered every such chamber dismantled centuries past. If one still exists here, someone has gone to great lengths to hide it from me. We landed under cover of the outpost's natural shadow, Mira leading a small team ahead to secure the surface structures, while the Empress, Grace, and I followed closely behind. The outpost itself appeared abandoned exactly as the records suggested, its buildings covered in dust and disrepair. But beneath the surface, hidden behind a section of collapsed flooring that had clearly been disguised deliberately, we discovered a hidden passage leading deep underground. The air grew colder as we descended, the passage widening into a vast chamber, lit by pale blue light, similar to what I had seen throughout the Nixari capital, though here it felt colder, more clinical. Rows of containment cells lined the chamber's walls, and my stomach turned as I realized many of them were occupied, not by Nixari prisoners, but by humans, dozens of them, pale and weakened, clearly having been held captive for an extended period. "These are colonists," Grace said, horror creeping into her voice as she moved closer to examine the nearest cell. "From one of the outer human settlements." The Empress's expression darkened further as she studied the scene before us, her hands clenching at her sides. "This is far worse than I feared," she said quietly. Before we could investigate further, a voice echoed through the chamber, calm and measured, carrying an authority that immediately set every one of Mira's soldiers on alert. "I wondered how long it would take you to find this place, Your Majesty." An elderly Nixari man stepped out from behind a large containment structure at the far end of the chamber, his robes marked with symbols I did not recognize, his eyes carrying the same faint red glow as the guards I had first seen in the throne room, though his seemed deeper, older, more unsettling. "Elder Varric Ashgrove," the Empress said, her voice cold with recognition. "I should have known you were behind this. You forbade practices that our people once relied upon to survive and grow stronger," Varric said calmly. "I have simply continued the work our ancestors began, work you abandoned out of misplaced sentiment. You are using human colonists as raw material for forbidden rituals," the Empress said, her voice rising with barely controlled fury. "This ends now." Varric did not appear troubled by her anger. Instead, he gestured toward the containment cells with an almost casual movement. "These humans are merely a means to an end," he said, "a necessary sacrifice for the next stage of our evolution. You have grown weak, Your Majesty, content to let our empire stagnate rather than pursue true power. I, and others who share my vision, intend to correct that mistake." "Others?" Mira asked sharply. "How many elders are involved in this?" Varric smiled thinly, clearly enjoying the moment. "More than you realize, General. This conspiracy runs deeper than a single hidden chamber. Lord Cassian Thorne's opposition to your human guest was never simply about court politics. It was a necessary distraction, keeping the Empress's attention focused on the throne room while our true work continued undisturbed. The realization hit me at once. Lord Thorne's hostility, the assassination attempt in the garden, all of it had been carefully arranged to keep the Empress occupied while this deeper conspiracy continued unnoticed. My presence, rather than simply being a political inconvenience, had inadvertently become the catalyst that drew her attention away from the growing threat within her own court. "You will release these prisoners immediately," the Empress said, stepping forward, her entire posture radiating barely restrained power. "I am afraid that is no longer possible," Varric said. "The ritual is already nearing completion. In a matter of hours, myself and several other elders will ascend beyond anything your outdated rule can comprehend, and there will be nothing you can do to stop it." Without warning, the chamber's lighting shifted, and several more figures emerged from hidden alcoves around the room, each one an elder Nixari marked with the same ritual symbols as Varric. Mira's soldiers immediately raised their weapons, but Varric raised a hand calmly, unconcerned by the show of force. "Violence will not stop what has already been set into motion," he said. "The ritual chamber beneath us has already been activated. Even if you defeat us here, the process will continue without our direct involvement." The Empress's expression shifted from anger to something colder, more calculated. Then we will simply have to stop the ritual itself, she said. She turned to Mira and issued rapid instructions, directing her soldiers to secure the captive colonists and prepare to fight their way through the elders blocking our path. Meanwhile, she turned to me, her violet eyes locking onto mine with sudden intensity. "Daniel," she said, "I need your help." "With what?" I asked, startled by the request. The ritual chamber below us was designed centuries ago to respond to a specific counter-command, a failsafe built into its earliest design, one that only a founding member of the Nixari bloodline can activate, she said. But activating it requires a moment of complete focus, a moment I cannot afford while defending against Varric and his allies. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "Stay close to me," she said. "Protect my focus while I disable the ritual. If I am interrupted, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for this outpost, but potentially for every human colony within reach of this empire's influence." I nodded, understanding the weight of what she was asking, though fear coursed through me at the thought of standing directly in the path of ancient, powerful beings intent on stopping us. Grace moved instinctively closer to me as well, determined not to be separated during whatever came next. The fight that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Mira's soldiers clashed fiercely with Varric's followers, the chamber filling with flashes of energy and the sound of impacts that shook the very walls around us. The Empress moved toward a large mechanism at the center of the chamber, her hands glowing faintly as she began working through a complex series of ancient controls, her expression locked in fierce concentration. Varric, seeing what she intended, moved to intercept her directly, but I stepped forward instinctively, placing myself between them despite every instinct screaming at me that I stood no real chance against a being of his age and power. "Move aside, human," Varric said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "This does not concern you." "It concerns every human this empire has ever touched," I said, refusing to back down despite the fear coursing through me. "And I'm not moving." Varric's expression twisted with contempt, and he moved to strike me aside, but before his hand could connect, Mira intercepted him, engaging him directly while shouting for me to stay focused on protecting the Empress's concentration. I turned back toward her, watching as her hands moved rapidly across the ancient mechanism, sweat beading on her brow despite her otherwise composed exterior. "Almost there," she said through gritted teeth. "Just a little longer." Grace grabbed a discarded weapon from a fallen soldier, standing beside me protectively as more of Varric's allies attempted to close in around us. Together, the three of us held our ground, buying precious seconds for the Empress to complete her work, despite the growing chaos surrounding us. Finally, with a sound like a great exhale, the ancient mechanism released a pulse of pale light that spread rapidly through the chamber, and I watched as the ritual symbols marking Varric and his allies began to fade, their glowing red eyes dimming rapidly. "No," Varric said, staggering backward, his voice filled with disbelief. "This is not possible. The failsafe was destroyed centuries ago." "You assumed too much, old friend," the Empress said, straightening from the mechanism, her expression exhausted but resolute. "I built more safeguards into this empire than even you knew existed." With the ritual disrupted, Mira's soldiers quickly overwhelmed the remaining resistance, securing Varric and his surviving allies, while others moved swiftly to free the captive human colonists from their containment cells. The chamber, once filled with the tension of impending catastrophe, slowly settled into a heavy, exhausted silence. The Empress approached Varric, who now knelt weakly on the chamber floor, stripped of whatever power the ritual had begun granting him. "You have betrayed everything this empire once stood for," she said, her voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "You will answer for what you have done here, and for every human life you have taken to fuel your ambition." Varric said nothing, his earlier confidence completely shattered, replaced by the quiet defeat of someone who had believed himself untouchable until the very last moment. As the chamber was secured and the freed colonists were given medical attention, the Empress turned to me, her expression softening slightly, despite the exhaustion clearly weighing on her. "You did not need to stand in Varric's path," she said. "It was reckless." "Maybe," I said, "but I couldn't just watch and do nothing." She studied me for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her violet eyes. "That," she said quietly, "is precisely the quality my empire lost long ago, the quality I have been searching for without fully realizing it, until you knelt before my throne only days ago." Grace stepped closer, glancing between us with a small, knowing smile despite the exhaustion evident on her own face. "It seems we've uncovered more than just a conspiracy today," she said. The Empress did not respond directly, but the look she gave me carried a weight far beyond simple gratitude, and I understood, without needing further words, that whatever connection had begun forming between an ancient empress and a simple human diplomat had only grown stronger through the trials we had just faced together. But even as relief settled over the chamber, I knew our victory here was only a single step in a much larger struggle. Lord Cassian Thorn remained free, his role in the conspiracy still unproven, and the full extent of the Elders' network remained unknown. Whatever confrontation still awaited us within the Nixari court, I understood clearly now that I would not be facing it alone. We returned to the Nixari capital with Varric Ashgrove and his surviving followers held in secure containment aboard the Empress's ship, along with the freed human colonists who were already receiving proper care and preparations for their eventual return home. The journey back felt different from the one that had carried us toward Vareth Hollow, heavier with the knowledge of what we had uncovered, yet lighter somehow with the relief of having stopped it before the ritual could reach completion. The Empress spent much of the return journey in quiet discussion with Mira, reviewing evidence gathered from the outpost, building a clear picture of how deeply the conspiracy had spread within her court. I could see the toll it was taking on her, the weight of confronting betrayal from within her own ranks. Elders she had known and trusted for centuries, now revealed as conspirators willing to sacrifice human lives for forbidden power. "There is still Lord Thorn to consider," Mira said during one such discussion, which I happened to overhear while passing through the ship's central corridor. "Varric confirmed his involvement, but proving it before the full court will require careful handling." "I am aware," the Empress replied. "Thorn is far too skilled a politician to have left obvious evidence connecting himself directly to Varric's activities. We will need to be precise in how we expose him." When we finally arrived back at the palace, word of our journey had already begun spreading through the court, distorted and incomplete, fueling rumors and speculation among the noble houses. The Empress wasted no time addressing the situation directly, calling for a full assembly of the court within hours of our return. I stood beside Grace near the edge of the Grand Assembly Hall as nobles filed in, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open suspicion, many glancing toward me with the same distrust I had grown accustomed to since my arrival. Lord Cassian Thorn entered among the last, his composure as calm and controlled as ever, though I noticed a flicker of something uneasy behind his gray eyes when his gaze landed on Mira standing near the front of the assembly. The Empress ascended to her throne, and unlike our first meeting, she did not dismiss the court this time. Instead, she addressed them directly, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. "3 days ago," she began, "I traveled to the outpost known as Varath Hollow, following evidence of unauthorized activity that had gone undetected for far too long. What we discovered there was a conspiracy centuries in the making, led by Elder Varric Ashgrove, who sought to revive forbidden rituals using human colonists as sacrifice in pursuit of power beyond what our empire's laws permit." Murmurs spread through the assembled nobles, shock and disbelief evident on many faces, though I noticed several individuals near the back of the hall exchanging quick, nervous glances, clearly aware of the conspiracy's existence, even if they had not directly participated. "Elder Ashgrove and his followers have been apprehended," the Empress continued, "and will answer fully for their crimes. However, his conspiracy did not operate in isolation. It required distraction, a way to keep my attention focused elsewhere while his work continued undisturbed." Her gaze shifted deliberately toward Lord Thorn, and the entire hall seemed to hold its breath collectively as the implication became clear to everyone present. "Your Majesty," Lord Thorne said carefully, "I fail to see what connection you are suggesting." "Elder Ashgrove has already confirmed your involvement," the Empress said calmly. "Your opposition to my human guest's presence within the palace was never truly about political principle, was it, Lord Thorne? It was a calculated distraction, designed to keep the court's attention, and my own, focused on a manufactured controversy while your allies' true work continued unnoticed." The color drained slightly from Lord Thorne's face, though he maintained his composure with visible effort. "These are serious accusations without proof," he said. "I have testimony, along with evidence recovered from Vareth Hollow, directly linking communications between yourself and Elder Ashgrove over the past 2 years," the Empress said, gesturing toward Mira, who stepped forward, holding a data device containing the evidence gathered during our investigation. The hall fell into stunned silence as the evidence was presented, murmurs of shock rippling through the assembled nobles as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Lord Thorne's carefully constructed composure finally cracked, his expression shifting from calm confidence to something closer to desperation. "Everything I have done," he said, his voice rising, "was to protect this empire's strength. You have grown complacent, Your Majesty, content to let outside species like the humans dictate the terms of our future. Ashgrove's methods may have been extreme, but his goal, our empire's continued dominance, was not wrong. Dominance built upon the suffering of innocent lives is not strength," the Empress said, her voice carrying absolute authority through the hall. "It is exactly the kind of corruption I have sworn, for centuries, to prevent this empire from becoming." Lord Thorne was quickly restrained by palace guards, his protests fading into silence as he was led from the hall, his political power and influence collapsing in an instant before the full assembled court. The remaining nobles watched in stunned silence, clearly processing the scale of betrayal that had nearly gone unnoticed within their own ranks. Once the hall had settled, the Empress rose from her throne, her gaze sweeping across the assembled nobles with quiet determination. "This conspiracy has revealed something I have avoided confronting for far too long," she said. "In my effort to maintain stability, I allowed this empire to grow rigid, resistant to change, easily manipulated by those who claim tradition while secretly pursuing corruption. That ends today." She turned slightly, her gaze finding mine among the crowd, and something in her expression shifted, softening despite the weight of the moment. "Centuries ago," she continued, addressing the court once more, "our people were transformed from humans into something new, something powerful. But in perfecting that transformation, we lost something valuable, the willingness to question, to resist, to refuse simply accepting things as they are. I saw that quality reflected clearly in the eyes of a human diplomat only days ago, and it reminded me of everything our empire has quietly sacrificed in the name of order." The hall remained silent, every noble listening intently as the Empress continued, her voice carrying a conviction I had not heard from her before, even during our most private conversations. "Going forward," she said, "this empire will pursue a new path, one that values genuine strength over rigid control, one that welcomes partnership with other species rather than viewing them merely as potential threats or resources to exploit. Humanity has proven, through the actions of Daniel Cross and his companions, that partnership between our peoples is not only possible, but valuable." I felt every eye in the hall shift toward me once more, though this time the weight behind those gazes felt different, curiosity replacing outright suspicion, and in some cases, something close to respect. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as the Nixari court began the difficult process of restructuring following the exposure of Thorne and Ashgrove's conspiracy. Formal charges were prepared, trials were conducted according to ancient Nixari law, and slowly the empire began settling into a new equilibrium, one shaped significantly by the events that had begun the moment I knelt before the Empress's throne. During this time, the Empress and I spent increasing amounts of time together, no longer confined to formal audiences or urgent crisis meetings, but simply talking, learning about each other's perspectives, sharing stories from our vastly different lives, separated by centuries of experience. Grace, meanwhile, worked closely with Mira and several sympathetic Nixari officials to establish the framework for a genuine diplomatic partnership between our two peoples, one built on mutual respect rather than fear or suspicion. One evening, as the artificial lights of the palace dimmed into their nighttime cycle, the Empress found me standing on a balcony overlooking the glowing Nixari capital, the city stretching endlessly beneath a sky filled with distant, unfamiliar stars. "You are troubled," she said, joining me at the railing. "Just thinking," I said, "about how much has changed since I first arrived here. A few weeks ago, I thought I was going to die kneeling on your throne room floor. Now I'm standing here, watching a city that feels almost like home." She was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes reflecting the soft glow of the city below. "I have ruled this empire for longer than your entire species has existed in its current form," she said. "In all that time, I have never expected a single human diplomat to change the course of my empire's future so profoundly." "I didn't do this alone," I said. "You were the one who decided to fight against Thorn and Ashgrove, who decided to change the empire's direction. I just happened to be standing there when it started." "Perhaps," she said, "but you were the reminder I needed, the spark that reawakened something I had allowed to fade over the centuries. Do you remember what I said to you, the very first moment we met?" "You said you knew me," I said quietly. "Yes," she said, turning to face me fully, her expression open in a way I had not seen since our very first private conversation. "And I meant it more deeply than you likely understood at the time. I did not simply see a reflection of my former human self in your eyes, Daniel. I saw proof that everything my empire tried to erase over the centuries, the stubbornness, the defiance, the refusal to simply accept injustice, was never truly a flaw to be corrected. It was the very reason my people survived long enough to become what we are today." I felt the weight of her words settle deeply within me, understanding now the full significance of that first fateful meeting, the moment an ancient empress had looked into the eyes of a frightened human prisoner and recognized something she believed had been lost forever. "What happens now?" I asked. "For us, I mean. For humanity and the Nixari." She smiled, a rare and genuine expression that transformed her entire face, softening the weight of centuries she carried constantly. "Now," she said, "we build something new together. A partnership between two peoples who each have something valuable to offer the other. Your people's stubborn refusal to accept limits, paired with the strength and wisdom my empire has accumulated over centuries, could accomplish things neither of our civilizations could achieve alone." As we stood together on that balcony, overlooking a city that had nearly torn itself apart from betrayal and ancient ambition, I understood clearly that everything that had happened since my arrival, the fear, the danger, the discoveries, had led toward this singular moment, the beginning of a genuine alliance between humanity and an empire far older and more powerful than we had ever imagined encountering. Grace found us there some time later, carrying news that the first official trade and diplomatic agreements between Earth and the Nixari Dominion had been successfully drafted, ready for formal signing within days. The Empress listened with quiet satisfaction, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw genuine hope reflected clearly in her ancient violet eyes. In the months that followed, humanity's relationship with the Nixari Dominion transformed entirely, evolving from a fragile, fearful first contact into a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Word of what had happened within the Nixari court spread eventually throughout human space as well, and though many humans remained cautious of an empire built upon such ancient and unfamiliar power, few could deny the significance of what had been achieved. I remained within the Nixari capital far longer than my original mission had ever intended, serving as a bridge between two civilizations learning, slowly and carefully, to trust one another. The Empress, once a distant and untouchable ruler shrouded in centuries of careful control, had become something else entirely to me, a partner, a friend, and perhaps something even deeper still forming between us with each passing day. Looking back on everything that had happened since that first terrifying moment kneeling before her throne, I understood clearly now why she had chosen those particular words the very instant our eyes first met. She had not simply seen a human prisoner awaiting judgment. She had seen the return of something she believed lost forever, proof that even after countless centuries, even after empires rose and fell and transformed beyond recognition, the most valuable qualities of humanity, courage, defiance, and the refusal to simply give in, could never truly be erased. And in recognizing that truth within me, an ancient empress had found the strength to finally reclaim what her own empire had quietly sacrificed centuries ago, beginning a new chapter not just for the Nixari dominion, but for humanity's place among the stars as well.